The Grand Crystal Ballroom of the Aethelred Hotel didn't just smell of money, it smelled of its components: the waxy perfume of hothouse lilies, the metallic tang of chilled champagne, the savory ghost of seared wagyu, and beneath it all, the faint, sharp scent of desperation from the staff who served it. For Zara Adebayo, it mostly smelled like survival. Her uniform, a starched black sheath dress with a crisp white apron, was a second skin she wore for 10 hours a day. It was a costume of invisibility, designed to make her blend into the polished mahogany and gilded trim. She moved through the glittering chaos with an economy of motion learned over 2 years of balancing trays heavy with other people's dreams. Her hair, a crown of tight, intricate braids, was pulled back so severely it made the corners of her eyes ache. And it was her hands that told the real story. Long, elegant fingers, but with calluses on the pads and a small puckered scar on her right palm from a slip with a coffee urn. They were the hands of someone who worked hard. Her eyes, the color of dark, rich soil after a rain, saw everything. The tremor in a CEO's hand as he checked the markets on his phone. The flicker of contempt in a wife's eyes as she watched her husband talk to a younger woman. The subtle signals of the security details, their bodies a language of tension and readiness. Tonight, the tension was a high, thin wire humming through the room. Mr. Kim, the hotel's events manager, scurried between knots of staff, his face slick with sweat. His voice was a strained whisper. Director Choi is at table 7. No mistakes, no eye contact unless directly addressed. His party is volatile. Do you understand? Absolute perfection. A ripple of fear went through the junior staff. Zara felt nothing but a familiar, weary weight settle in her gut. This weight had a name, Mama Grace. It had a number too, the 6-figure sum for the experimental treatment that was her grandmother's only chance. That number was why she was here, in this room of predators and prey, playing the part of a ghost. Each perfect pour of wine, each cleared plate, was a down payment on a few more precious months for the woman who had raised her. She allowed her eyes to sweep the room once more, a habit she couldn't break. She cataloged the exits, the security positions, the potential threats. It was instinct, honed in a life she'd left behind. In the corner, at a small 2-person table slightly removed from the main floor, he sat Chairman Kang. An elderly man with a face like a weathered scroll, he was a fixture at the hotel, the quiet, unassuming head of a logistics empire that controlled half the shipping in Busan. He always requested her section, always treated her with a grave, distant courtesy, and always tipped in cash, enough to cover her grandmother's co-pays for a week. He was watching the room with the same predatory stillness she felt in her own bones. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He gave a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition of one predator to another, a detail no one else would ever catch. Her past was a ghost that walked beside her. Zara Adebayo, daughter of a Nigerian diplomat, raised in the bustling, chaotic port city of Busan, South Korea, fluent in its language, its culture, its hard, unwritten rules. She had once been on a track for a diplomatic career of her own, an intelligence analyst with a mind for patterns and a gift for seeing the cracks in any system. Then her father passed, her mother followed, and Mama Grace's diagnosis had shattered that life into a million pieces. The degrees and the fluency meant nothing when faced with the brutal arithmetic of American healthcare, so she donned the uniform. She had made herself small. She had become invisible. It was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. A commotion from table 7 pulled her from her thoughts. Laughter, loud and brittle. Director Choi Min-jun held court. He was the worst kind of man. One whose power was inherited, not earned. The son of a construction magnate, he wore his suit like a costume and his authority like a weapon. He was drunk, as his face flushed, his gestures expansive and sloppy. "Another bottle," he slurred, waving a dismissive hand in the air without looking up. Mr. Kim gestured frantically at Zara. Her turn. She moved toward the table, her face a mask of polite neutrality. She retrieved the empty bottle of Louis Roederer Cristal, her movements fluid and silent. "The 2008, sir?" she asked, her voice low and even. The professionally placid accent of the service industry sanded smooth of any regional identity. Choi finally looked at her. His eyes, small and piggy, raked over her, noting her dark skin, her braided hair, her uniform. A smirk twisted his lips. It was the look of a man who enjoyed pulling the wings off flies. "Listen to that," he said to his sycophants at the table, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Where are you from? Be girl, with that accent. America? Africa? It's so thick." The air around the table grew still. His friends chuckled nervously. Zara felt a cold, familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Humiliation was part of the job description. She had endured it before. She would endure it now. For Mama Grace. "I am from here, sir. Los Angeles," she replied, her voice unwavering. It was the simplest answer, the one that invited the fewest questions. "Los Angeles," he scoffed, drawing the name out as if it were a joke. "And you can understand me? You can understand our order? Amazing." He turned to his friends and began speaking in rapid, slurred Korean, confident in the shield of his language. "Look at this dark thing," he sneered, the slur hitting Zara's ears like a physical blow. "They send these monkeys to serve us now. Can it even count? I bet she can't even spell her own name." The men at the table laughed, a chorus of weak, obsequious hyenas. Zara stood perfectly still. Her training, her entire life, had taught her to control her reactions, to be a gray wall, letting insults slide off her. But the words, the casual, brutal racism, found a crack in her armor. They weren't just insults, they were a denial of her very existence, of the life she had lived, of the language she knew as well as her own name. Choi, emboldened by his audience, grew more theatrical. He flagged down a junior waiter carrying a tray with a pot of freshly brewed barley tea. "Here, I'll take that," he commanded, snatching the heavy ceramic pot. He turned back to Zara, his eyes glittering with malice. "You look thirsty. A gift." Time seemed to slow. Zara saw the intention in his eyes before his muscles even moved. She saw the trajectory of the pot, the slight tilt of his wrist. She saw Mr. Kim's eyes widen in horror, his body frozen. She saw the other patrons at nearby tables start to look away, not wanting to be involved. And then he moved. He didn't throw it. He tripped, letting the scalding liquid surge from the spout in a steaming arc directly onto the back of her hand. Fire. White-hot, searing pain shot up her arm. The heat was shocking, a violation that stole her breath. The tea soaked the pristine white cuff of her uniform, turning it a sickly brown. Her skin underneath blistered instantly. A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. Choi laughed, a high, ugly sound. "Clumsy me," he said in English, for the benefit of the wider audience. You should be more careful where you stand." The world narrowed to the agony in her hand and the sound of his laughter. Mr. Kim rushed forward, but he wasn't looking at her. He was bowing to Director Choi, babbling apologies. "Sir, I am so sorry for the inconvenience. We will clean this up immediately. Please forgive our clumsiness." He was apologizing to the man who had assaulted her. He was blaming the staff. He was erasing her completely. Zara didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She stood rooted to the spot, her body rigid with a control that cost her everything. The pain was a grounding force, a clarifying fire. In the space of 3 heartbeats, a calculation was made. 1. Mama Grace's face, pale and tired but smiling, floated in her mind. The cost of her silence. 2. The pile of bills on her small kitchen table. The cost of her submission. 3. The echo of Choi's Korean slur, dark thing, monkey, and the weight of her own stolen dignity. The cost of her invisibility. And in that 3rd heartbeat, the equation shifted. Survival was no longer about endurance. It was about consequence. She had made herself small to protect her grandmother. But what good was that protection if it required the death of her own soul? She lifted her head. The mask of the deferential waitress fell away, shattered by the heat and the hate. Her spine straightened, each vertebra locking into place, adding an inch to her height. She pulled her shoulders back. It was a subtle shift, but the effect was profound. She was no longer a servant cowering. She was a pillar of judgment. She looked directly at Choi Min-jun, not at his chest, not at his chin, yet directly into his small, cruel eyes. The ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to fade into a dull roar, the spotlight of the universe contracting to this one table. Choi's laughter faltered, dying in his throat. He saw the change in her. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. The prey was no longer behaving like prey. Zara said nothing. She simply held his gaze. The silence stretched. It became a weapon. It was the silence of a judge before passing sentence. It was the silence of a predator before the strike. Then she spoke. Her voice was not the soft, placid tone of a waitress. It was cold as steel, quiet, but carrying an authority that cut through the silence like a razor. And it was not in English. She spoke in flawless, perfect Korean, not the clean soul dialect of news anchors and businessmen. Hers was the rough, less salt-of-the-earth dialect of Busan, the language of dock workers, fishermen, and gangsters. It was the language of her childhood, the language of secrets. "Director Choi," she began, her pronunciation impeccable, each syllable a perfectly formed shard of ice. "A man of your family's stature should have better table manners. You spill tea like a clumsy child who has forgotten his mother's teachings." The shock at the table was instantaneous and absolute. Choi's jaw went slack. His friends stared, their weak smiles frozen on their faces. They had been speaking in Korean to exclude her, to mock her behind a wall of language they believed she could not scale. She had just torn that wall down brick by brick and stood in the rubble. She wasn't finished. She took a small, deliberate step closer to the table, ignoring the throbbing agony in her hand. "Especially," she continued, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that only the men at the table could hear, "when you are so loudly discussing your plan to embezzle from the Busan Port Authority pension fund to cover your gambling debts in Macau. That seems unwise." If her first words had been a shock, these were a tactical detonation. The color drained from Choi Min-jun's face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. His friend, a man named Park, physically recoiled as if she had struck him. He had been the one foolishly bragging about their clever accounting. Choi sputtered, trying to regain control. Who are you? How do you—" "I'm just a waitress," Zara said, switching back to placid English, her voice now dripping with an ironic weight that was more menacing than any shout. Alk with very good ears. From across the room, a figure began to move. It was Kwon Ji-hoon. He had been watching from a table in the shadows, a silent observer to the entire drama. He was the true power in the room, the youngest son of the chairman of the Shinjin Group, a man whose quiet authority made Choi's performative blustering look pathetic. To most, he was a legitimate businessman. To those who knew, he was the heir to the city's most powerful criminal organization. Ji-hoon moved with a predatory grace, a leopard in a bespoke suit. He was flanked by two silent men who were his shadows. The air parted for him. People stopped talking as he passed. He didn't look at Choi. He didn't look at the mess on the floor. His eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on Zara. He stopped beside the table. The silence that followed was absolute. Lee Ji-hoon finally turned his gaze to Choi Min-jun. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Choi Si," he said in formal Korean, the honorific a stinging insult in its coldness. "You have embarrassed your family. You have embarrassed my guests. Leave, now." It was not a request. It was a command backed by the unspoken threat of total annihilation. Choi, pale and trembling, scrambled to his feet. He shot Zara a look of pure, venomous hatred, a promise of future retribution. Then he and his friends practically fled the ballroom. The spectacle was over. Ji-hoon's attention returned to Zara. He looked at her burned hand, which she held rigidly at her side. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold control. "Come with me," he said. It was not a question. He led her from the ballroom through a private service door and up a staff elevator into the penthouse suite, a world of silent, opulent luxury. One of his men was already there with a comprehensive first aid kit. As the man began to expertly clean and dress the burn with professional detachment, Ji-hoon stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. "The manager has been instructed that you were overcome by the heat and have been sent home for the evening," he stated, his back still to her. "You will be paid for the full week. Your employment here is terminated, for your own safety." Zara watched the man wrap her hand in clean white gauze. The pain was a dull, persistent throb. My safety or your convenience? She asked, her voice steady. He turned from the window. For the first time, he looked at her not as a piece on a board, but as a person, an anomaly. Who are you? He asked, his voice low. My name is Zara Adebayo. That is not what I asked, he corrected her, his gaze intense. The Busan dialect, the comment about the pension fund. You are not a waitress. This was the moment, the negotiation. She had a choice. Retreat back into the shadows, or step into the light, with all the danger that entailed. She thought of Mama Grace. The shadows were no longer safe. I was many things before I was a waitress, she said carefully. For 5 years, I was the primary caregiver for a boy named Leo Kwan. I taught him his letters. I taught him how to ride a bike. I held him when he had nightmares about his mother. Recognition flickered in Ji-hoon's cold eyes, a crack in the marble facade. Leo was his son. After his wife's death in a tragic accident, he had been lost, drowning in grief and the pressures of his position. A trusted family retainer had recommended a discreet, highly educated woman to care for the boy, a woman who had become the center of his son's world. Until, for reasons of security, Leo had been sent to a boarding school in Switzerland. The household staff had been dismissed with generous severance packages. Zara had vanished. You're the one they called Zed, he said, the name a ghost from his son's past. Leo, he still asks about you. A pang of genuine sorrow hit Zara. She had loved that little boy. I needed the money, she said simply, gesturing with her bandaged hand. My grandmother is ill. The severance ran out. And the pension fund? He pressed, his focus returning. That was not gossip. Director Choi is a fool, Zara stated, her voice hardening. He drinks too much and brags to impress weaker men. I listened. I put the pieces together. It's a pattern. He's skimming from the concrete contracts for the new port expansion, funneling it through shell corporations. The pension fund is how he's hiding the initial theft. Ji-hoon was silent for a long moment, studying her. He was assessing her, calculating her value, her threat. The air was thick with unspoken possibilities. Choi Min-jun is a problem for my family, he said finally, his voice flat. His father is a partner in our Shinjin Marine Division. This kind of theft, this dishonor, it reflects on us. It cannot be allowed. So you'll have him killed, Zara said. It wasn't a question, a flicker of something, amusement. That respect crossed his face. That is one solution, a messy one. It invites questions. It invites war with the Choi family, who are powerful, if foolish. There are other solutions, Zara countered, feeling the ground shift beneath her. She was no longer a victim. She was a strategist. Ruin is quieter than a bullet, and far more permanent. You destroy a man's reputation. You take his money. You expose him as a fraud. His own family will cast him out. There is no war. There is only a quiet, pathetic end. He stared at her, a long, assessing silence. He saw it then. Not just the woman who had cared for his son, but the mind behind the eyes, the analyst, the predator. You have a plan, he stated. I have the beginning of one, she corrected. I need information, financial records, shipping manifests, access to his office. Things I can't get with an apron and a serving tray. And if I provide these things, then I will give you Choi Min-jun's head on a platter of his own making, she promised, her voice laced with the cold fury she had suppressed for so long. And in return, my grandmother's medical bills are paid, all of them, and she receives the best care under your protection. It was a trade, expertise for resources, intelligence for security. It was not a rescue, it was an alliance. Kwon Ji-hoon walked over to the marble bar and poured 2 glasses of a dark, expensive scotch. He handed one to her. His fingers brushed against hers, a brief, electrifying touch. Choi will not let this go, he warned her. He felt humiliated. He will come for you. Let him, Zara said, her voice a low flame. He thinks I'm just a waitress. He's about to find out how wrong he is. The next 4 weeks were a blur of calculated warfare. Ji-hoon moved Zara and her grandmother into a secure, high-rise apartment that overlooked the city, the kind of place with biometric security and windows that could stop a bullet. Mama Grace, confused but trusting, was installed in a private hospital suite with a team of the country's best oncologists. The financial trap that had held Zara in place for 2 years was gone, replaced by a different kind of cage, one made of gilded safety and deadly purpose. Ji-hoon gave her an office, a sterile, high-tech space in the Shinjin Group headquarters. It was a ghost office, not on any official directory. He provided her with a team of 2 discreet hackers and unlimited access to their network. But he did not give her a plan. He gave her the tools. The strategy was hers alone. Zara shed the skin of the waitress and stepped back into the woman she was always meant to be. She worked with a relentless, cold fury. The years of forced subservience had sharpened her senses, honed her patience. She sifted through terabytes of data, her analyst's mind finding the threads Choi had tried so hard to bury. She found the shell corporations in Panama, the falsified concrete orders, the ghost employees on the port payroll. The scale of the theft was breathtaking, far larger than Choi's drunken bragging had suggested. He wasn't just covering gambling debts. He was systematically gutting his father's company to build his own secret empire. One evening, while tracing a wire transfer through a bank in the Cayman Islands, she hit a wall, a level of encryption her team couldn't crack, and she needed physical access to the server in Choi's primary office. Ji-hoon's solution was simple. "I will send my men. They will retrieve the server." "No," Zara said, looking up from her screen. They were in her apartment's living room, the city lights a diamond tapestry below. "Your men are hammers. They break things. This requires a scalpel. They'll be spotted. The server will be wiped remotely the second an alarm is tripped. I'll go myself." He turned to face her, his expression a mask of disapproval. "It is too dangerous." "Danger is a matter of perspective, Kwon-si," she replied, her tone firm. "Your men know how to fight. I know how to be invisible. I've been practicing for 2 years. I know the service corridors of every major building in this city. I know the shift changes for the cleaning crews. I know how to walk into a place and have no one remember my face. You can't teach that. You have to live it." It was the first time she had overruled him. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not anger, but a recalculation. He was used to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. She was not his subordinate. She was his partner. "You will not go alone," he stated. "I will not be accompanied," she countered. "1 person is a shadow, 2 is a target. I go alone, or the data stays where it is." He stared at her for a long, tense moment. Then, he gave a single, sharp nod. He was deferring to her. It was a bigger victory than cracking any server. 2 nights later, dressed in the simple gray uniform of a contract cleaning service, Zara slipped into the Choi Tower. She moved with the quiet, yet weary purpose of the after-hours staff, her head down, her movements economical. She was a ghost again, but this time, it was by choice. It was a weapon. She accessed Choi's office on the 45th floor, bypassing the low-level security with a cloned keycard her team had made. The office was a monument to ego, all black marble, chrome, and self-congratulatory awards. She ignored it all, going straight to a hidden panel behind a large, abstract painting. Inside was the server. She attached a small, powerful data cloning device and waited. The 10 minutes it took for the drive to copy felt like an eternity. Just as the progress bar hit 99%, she heard voices in the hallway. Security, making an unscheduled round. Her heart hammered against her ribs. There was no time to hide. She grabbed the device, slid the panel shut, and snatched a trash can from beside the desk. She was emptying it into her collection bag when 2 guards entered the room. They saw her, a black woman in a cleaner's uniform. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see. They didn't even register her as a person. "Hey you're not supposed to be in here," one of them barked in Korean. Zara looked up, her face a mask of confusion and fear. She bowed her head subserviently. "I am sorry," she stammered in broken, heavily accented Korean. "New," supervisor said, "floor 45. The guards exchanged a look of annoyance and contempt. To them, she was just another piece of incompetent foreign labor. "The executive floors are cleaned by the in-house team," the lead guard snapped. "Get out, now. Go back to your company and tell them they sent you to the wrong building." She bowed again. "I'm mumbling apologies, and scuttled out of the office, pushing her cart ahead of her. She didn't breathe again until she was out of the building and blocks away, the small, powerful data drive safe in her pocket. She had used their prejudice, their blindness, as her shield. The data on the server was the final nail in Choi's coffin. It contained not just the details of his embezzlement, but something far worse. Correspondence proving he was selling shipping lane information and container security codes to a rival Yakuza clan in Japan. He wasn't just a thief, he was a traitor. The revelation hardened Ji-hoon's face into a mask of cold fury. This was a betrayal that went beyond money. It was a strike against his family, his organization, his city. But Choi was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. He must have suspected something was wrong. He couldn't know who was coming for him, but he felt the net tightening. So he lashed out at the only person he could connect to his public humiliation, the waitress. He sent men. Not to Zara's secure high-rise, which was a fortress, but to the one place she was still vulnerable. Ji-hoon got the call from his security team at the hospital. He found Zara in the operations room, her eyes fixed on a screen displaying a complex flowchart of Choi's money laundering scheme. "There was an incident at the hospital," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Zara's head snapped up, all the color draining from her face. "Mama Grace?" "She is safe. My men intercepted 2 individuals trying to gain access to her room. They claimed to be orderlies. They were not." He paused. "They were carrying narcotics, a syringe of uncut fentanyl. The police would have found it during a routine search later this evening. The implication was horrifying. They were going to kill her grandmother with an overdose and frame her as an addict, or plant the drugs and have an elderly cancer patient thrown in jail. It was a message, a cruel, vile message." Zara stood up, her body trembling not with fear, but with a rage so profound it was silent. The last vestiges of the analyst, the strategist, fell away. This was no longer a game of numbers and data. It was blood. "He crossed a line," she whispered. "Yes," Ji-hoon agreed, his eyes like black ice. "My father is meeting with the other families tomorrow. We will have their blessing to remove the Choi family. It will be a war." "No," Zara said, her voice suddenly calm, clear, and absolute. "No war. No more bloodshed. You wanted his head on a platter. I'm going to give it to you, my way." She turned back to her screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a different set of files. Blueprints, guest lists, security schedules. "The Choi family is hosting their company's 50th anniversary gala next month," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "at the Aethelred Hotel, in the Grand Crystal Ballroom." Ji-hoon stood beside her, watching her work. He saw the plan forming in her mind. It was audacious, it was public, and it was personal. "You want to destroy him in the same room where he tried to destroy you," he breathed, a note of awe in his voice. "Justice should be delivered at the scene of the crime," Zara said, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "He tried to make me invisible. Now I'm going to make sure he's the last thing anyone ever sees." The night of the Choi Corporation's 50th anniversary gala was a symphony of opulence. The Grand Crystal Ballroom was even more lavishly decorated than it had been the night Zara's life had changed. The air smelled of victory, champagne, and the cloying sweetness of Choi Min-jun's ego. He stood on a dais at the front of the room, preening under the warm glow of the spotlights, accepting congratulations from the city's elite. He was untouchable, a prince in his castle. He had forgotten all about the waitress. The great ballroom doors swung open. A ripple of curiosity went through the crowd. It was not a scheduled arrival. Zara entered. She was not in a servant's uniform. She wore a bespoke gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. It clung to her form, elegant and powerful. Her hair was styled in a magnificent braided updo, adorned with subtle diamond pins that caught the light. Around her neck was a simple, elegant necklace, a gift from Chairman Kang. She was flanked by 2 of Ji-hoon's most trusted men, their presence a quiet statement of power and protection. She didn't hurry. She walked with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes scanning the room. People turned to stare, whispering amongst themselves. Who is she? She was a vision of power and beauty, an utter mystery. She walked directly toward the head table at the front of the room, where Kwon Ji-hoon and his father, the venerable Chairman Kang, were seated as guests of honor. The path cleared before her as if by magic. She reached the table. Ji-hoon rose, a ghost of a smile on his lips, and pulled out the empty chair beside him. Zara sat. She was now at the center of power in the room. From the dais, Choi Min-jun saw her. His speech faltered. His smile froze. His mind short-circuited. He saw the face of the waitress, the black woman he had humiliated and assaulted. But he saw her clad in couture, sitting with the Kwon family, looking like she owned the very air in the room. The cognitive dissonance was so great, he visibly swayed. Zara met his gaze across the room. She gave him a small, slow smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile that promised devastation. Choi tried to recover, turning back to the microphone, his voice suddenly strained. As we look to the future, to the next 50 years of innovation and integrity. At that moment, on Zara's silent cue, the massive screens on either side of the stage flickered. The slick corporate promotional video vanished. It was replaced by something else. Bank statements from Panama, shipping manifests with forged signatures, audio recordings of Choi on the phone with a Yakuza boss, his voice a pathetic whine as he sold out his own family's company for a fraction of its worth. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by Choi's frantic voice captured on the recording. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and irrefutable. It was all Zara's work, packaged for maximum public humiliation. Choi stared at the screens in horror, his face ashen. His father, sitting in the front row, looked as if he had been turned to stone. But Zara wasn't finished. This wasn't about data on a screen. It was personal. She rose from her seat and walked to the dais, taking a second microphone from the stand. The room was so quiet, the click of her heels on the marble floor echoed like gunshots. She stood beside the trembling, broken man. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "Director Choi," she began, her English crisp and perfect. "Do you remember me?" He could only stare at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. She held up her right hand. Under the bright lights, the faint silvery trace of a scar was visible on the back of it. The same hand he had scalded. "You thought this hand was only good for serving tea," she said, her voice resonating with cold power. "You were wrong." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "It was also good for signing the affidavits that transferred every last one of your stolen assets to a compensation fund for the pensioners you robbed. And it was good for compiling the evidence that I sent to the National Prosecutor's Office an hour ago." She glanced toward the main doors. "I believe they are waiting for you now." As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened again. This time, it was a team of grim-faced prosecutors and police officers. They moved with quiet, inexorable purpose toward the stage. Choi finally broke. The facade of the powerful air shattered, revealing the pathetic, terrified child beneath. He fell to his knees. He grabbed the hem of Zara's gown, his face a mask of desperation. "Please," he begged, tears and snot running down his face. "Please, I'll pay you. I'll give you anything. Don't do this." Zara looked down at the groveling man at her feet. She felt no pity, only a cold, clean sense of justice delivered. She pulled her dress from his grasp with a look of distaste. "You have nothing left to give," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. And in that whisper, she used the gritty Busan dialect he had once found so amusing. "And a man who has forgotten his mother's teachings deserves to eat dirt." She turned and walked off the stage without a backward glance as the police hauled the sobbing, disgraced director away. His father didn't move. His friends looked away. His social and financial destruction was absolute, public, and complete. It was delivered not by a rival gangster or a government agency, but by the invisible woman he had tried to break. 6 months later, the view from Zara's office was of the entire Busan harbor. Ships moved like great ponderous beasts across the water, the lifeblood of the city she had claimed as her own. The office was minimalist and elegant, dark wood, brushed steel, and a single stunning piece of Nigerian art on the wall. A plaque on her door read, "Zara Adebayo, Chief of Risk Analysis and Strategic Security, Shinjin Group." She hadn't been gifted the title, She had built the division from the ground up. She had earned it. Her phone buzzed. It was a video call. She smiled as she answered. On the screen, Mama Grace was sitting in a lush, sun-drenched garden, her hair growing back in soft, silver curls. She was laughing, her face full of life and color. She was in remission. She was safe. "They're teaching me how to play Go," Mama Grace said, her voice strong. "Nice, that old man, Mr. Kang, he is a terrible cheat. But don't you tell him I said so." Zara's heart felt full to bursting. This was why. This was the victory that mattered. After the call, she turned back to her work, analyzing the security protocols for a new fleet of container ships. The door to her office opened without a knock. Kwon Ji-hoon entered, carrying 2 cups. He placed one on her desk. It was steaming, fragrant barley tea, the same kind Choi had used as a weapon. Now it was an offering, a symbol of peace. He didn't speak of the past. He never did. Their relationship was built on a foundation of unspoken understanding, of shared battles and mutual respect that ran deeper than any cheap declaration. He looked at the complex schematics on her screen. "The board meeting for the Port Authority is at 3, he said, in his voice the usual quiet rumble. "They have approved your new security protocols. They are listening to you now." It was a simple statement of fact, but it was everything. It was recognition. It was the confirmation of her power, earned through her own mind, her own courage, her own hands. He saw her, all of her, the analyst, the strategist, the survivor, the woman. Zara looked from the teacup to his face. His eyes, which had once been so cold and calculating, held a warmth reserved only for her. In this city of concrete and steel, of gangsters and businessmen, she had been invisible. She had been a victim. Now she was home. Not in a place, but in the quiet, absolute certainty of being seen. He didn't need to say more. His presence, his respect, was the only language that mattered. She picked up the tea, and the warmth seeping into her skin, chasing away the last ghost of a scar. What would you have done if you were in her shoes?